Next, we're going to cover quickly some other types of reorganizations that aren't quite as common. The first is the acquisitive type D reorganization. A type D reorganization can be acquisitive or divisive. This is similar to a type C, and if both type C and type D requirements are satisfied, the code mandates that we treat this as a type D reorganization. An acquisitive type D reorganization involves the transfer by a corporation, the target corporation, of substantially all of its assets to a controlled corporation in exchange for such corporation's stock and securities pursuant to a plan of reorganization. So the substantially all test that we've been using before is going to apply here. 70% of the gross assets, 90% of the net. The stock, securities, and other property received, plus any property retained, must be distributed pursuant to a complete liquidation of the transferor. And then there's a control requirement. The transferor, the target, and or one of its shareholders must control the transferee corporation immediately after the asset transfer. And that is defined as 50% or more of the total combined voting power of all classes of voting stock, or 50% or more of the total value of all classes of stock. The transferor's shareholders must maintain a continuing equity interest in the transferee corporation. So here we have the target and the parent, so the transferor and the transferee. The target transfers substantially all of its assets and maybe some liabilities. And then the parent transfers back its own stock. All right, and then step 2, the target transfers the A stock to its shareholders, and those shareholders transfer the T stock back to T. T liquidates. Post-reorganization structure, we have A corporation. It's owned by A shareholders and T's former shareholders. To qualify as a D reorganization, T's former shareholders must own 50% of A. Okay, a G reorganization is a reorganization that's going to take place according to a court-approved plan in bankruptcy, receivership, or other similar situation. In an acquisitive type G, the troubled company might transfer substantially all its assets to an acquiring corporation according to their court-approved plan, and then distribute all the stock, securities, and other property received in the exchange, plus any property retained, to its shareholders, security holders, or other creditors in exchange for their stock and debt interests. There are also divisive. We've been talking about acquisitive reorganizations. There's also divisive. They're usually also governed by type D, and the end result is usually a split off, spin off, or split up. I'm not going to focus too much on the details of these. I just kind of want you to know what they are. All right, so here we have D, the distributing corporation, and C is the controlling corporation. So D is going to give part of its assets to C, and C is going to transfer some stock back to D. And then in step 2, D is going to transfer that C stock out to its shareholders, and those shareholders are going to transfer back all the D stock held by the members of the group. So what is going to happen after that is there's going to be 2 corporations, D and C, and they're going to be not related anymore. So D is going to be owned by some of D's shareholders, and C is going to be owned by some of D's old shareholders. All right, we also have an E reorganization, which is a recapitalization. Here we must have a bona fide business purpose to do it. So a bona fide business purpose to recapitalize might be some estate planning purpose. We might want to reduce debt ratio. We might want to reduce interest expense, something like that. This can take the form of a stock for stock reorg. So I transfer common stock for a different type of common stock. It could be bond for stock. So I don't want to pay as much interest anymore. So I trade out bonds for stock, or it could be a bond for bond, changing up interest rates, changing up due dates, something like that. That's a type E. There is also a type F reorganization, and this is just going to change the identity, form, or place of organization of one corporation. It might change the state of incorporation. The assets and liabilities of the old corporation will be transferred to the new corporation in exchange for the stock and possible debt obligations. So maybe I'm moving my company from Texas to Oklahoma, and I want to be incorporated in Oklahoma, so I formed that new Oklahoma corporation, and then I engage in a type F reorganization. And it doesn't make sense to have any tax consequences in that transaction because it's really just a change in a place of organization.